Hi, Dan.
Hello there.
Hi, guys. You're watching Varmayak, and this is me, Sean. And today with me here is Дэном Аббнетом, one of the best authors for Black Library. So, hi, Dan. Please tell us, how did it all start for you? How did you get into 40K originally?
Well, as a game, I was aware of it for many years. I used to in the 80s. I used to be a very keen role-playing gamer, Dungeons and Dragons and RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu and Traveller in particular. So I was very well aware of Games Workshop, Red White Dwarf, that kind of stuff. And so when the game came along, it was something I was aware of, and I sort of got was aware of the flavour of it, that very particular flavour that you get with Warhammer 40K. And by then I was already writing, a freelance writer. I was writing comics a lot. And it was in the mid-90s when the Black Library was first getting started that they wanted some comic book writers to come along and do things for them. And I'd written some issues of Conan for Marvel, so I was invited in to see them. And I write comic strips, and from the comic strips they then said, "Do you fancy writing short stories?" And I said, "Yes, short prose fiction." And then finally they said, "Novels. We want to do novels." And I said, "Well, that's great. I wanted to write novels, but I hadn't found necessarily an outlet for it at that point because I was too busy with the comic work." And so my first novel was First and Only, the first Gaunt's Ghost book, and we're now, I don't know how many it is now, it's something approaching 40 novels for them, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's really how it started, and once I started writing it, I realised how much I enjoyed writing it.
Yeah, that's quite a few books. I mean, probably no other single author for Black Library wrote as much as you did.
I don't think so.
Yeah, you're by far the most productive or the most creative writer for them. What term do you prefer, productive or creative?
I think creative is nice. I'm not ashamed of my productiveness, but creative. I like the fact that when I started writing the books, and I think Graham in particular found this as well. But when you first start writing for 40K, there was so much. There's so many things that there wasn't a word for. Everyday things there weren't words for. So quite apart from creating characters and creating storylines and that kind of stuff, I found that I was inventing words for things because I needed to call them something, and was delighted to find, and now we're sort of 15 years later, delighted to see that when you pick up a codex, the word I invented for something is the word now definitively used in the universe. So to have helped universe build. Things like Data Slate and Prometheum and Physaline and just all sorts of everyday words for things have come out of just because I wrote something down and it became part of the language. I'm very proud of that kind of almost invisible contribution to the fabric of 40K.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. All right, it's a secret to nobody that you're a very famous writer today. But how do you think your real fame, it came to you with 40K or with some other different projects?
Gosh, I don't know. I think of my work for the Black Library as sort of being the single biggest, most important thing that I've done in 25 years of writing because there's a lot of novels there, and each novel is a very significant thing. I find it quite interesting when I'm at particularly when I go to something like the San Diego Comic Con or something like that, a big comic convention. I find it nice that I have people can come to me because they read my stuff, but quite often they only read one area of it. So I'll have a Warhammer fan, and maybe a Marvel fan, and maybe a 2000 AD reader, who can all come and talk to me at the same time and not realise that I do the other things, or even a Doctor Who or something like that. So yeah. I can actually have sort of conversations with 2 or 3 people at once who they're not aware of the other things that I've done. Sometimes, in fact, people have said, "Oh, are you the same Дэном Аббнетом who also does this thing over here?" And I think, yeah. Well, how many of me do you think there are? I think that's quite nice. But I think the sheer global reach of Warhammer and its fans worldwide that's really when I started to notice how many people were coming up to me and interested in what I do, because Warhammer is a sort of global phenomenon, and I've been to games days all over the world, and that's fantastic. That's a fantastic shared experience. So I think that's why I like writing for it so much, and I love talking to people when they come up to me at a games day.
Okay. A lot of our viewers think that during your horror heresy meetings with different writers for Black Library, you're the boss. So when all the people come there, you're the one having the final word on certain subjects. Is that true?
It's not actually. It's not. No. It's we have the Horus Heresy meetings, the summits, every sort of 2 or 3 months. And when we started the series, it was by invitation. The editorial team at the Black Library invited the 6 or 7 people they wanted to write the series. And we've met regularly since then. And if there's a boss at all, it would have to be Alan Merritt, who is the head of the intellectual property at Games Workshop, who comes in and tells us what we can and can't do, essentially, whether we've broken the rules, the things that we're not allowed to touch, the things we're not allowed to go near, but also will quite happily tell us things that we can do that we're not expected to play around with. A good example of that, and I won't be specific in case people haven't read it, but my second Horus Heresy novel, Legion, which is about the Alpha Legion, some of the big surprises in that were, as it were, given to me by Alan. He said, if you're going to write about the Alpha Legion, use this. And that was a real great thing. So you get that sort of give and take from the people who hold the reins of approval on everything you do. But we're a very democratic body when we meet. We meet in a room that's literally called the High Lords of Terror. It's on the door. Behind an enormous double-headed eagle on a glass window at the front of the building, and we sit there and we talk ideas back and forth, and often. Who gets to write something, or the things that we get to write aren't necessarily the things that we ourselves have invented. So we're throwing ideas at each other and building on them, and it goes around the table, and quite often we'll find ourselves writing a book that comes from an idea that somebody else had. We're not sort of proud about what we do and everything. We're sort of, it's very, sort of, like I said, very democratic, and we have such fun doing it as well. I think everybody contributes, and it's quite a lively, creative environment.
Interesting. A perfect world. Okay. So, obviously, as a 40K writer, you get to read a bunch of books from your colleagues. So, if you could point out 3 writers as your favorites, who would that be?
Oh gosh, that's really difficult. That's very, very difficult. That's potentially unfair, because whoever I pick, somebody else will think, "Why did he pick me?" I love reading what everybody else does, and it's just and sometimes it's somebody's very different take on something can be very inspiring. You get to see things in a very different way around. I've read an awful lot and loved an awful lot of what Graham McNeill does, simply because we've been working side by side on something, literally side by side on things like Prospero Burns and Thousand Suns, and also on the first 2 Horus books, where we were essentially playing idea tennis, literally trying to link these books together. So I always enjoyed reading Graham's stuff. I think Aaron Dembski-Bowden is terrific. He always stuns me. And again, he and I are now doing the same sort of things. In fact, the Horus Heresy novel that I'm writing at the moment is not only a sequel to my last Horus Heresy novel, it's also a sequel to Aaron's last Horus Heresy novel and to Jim Swallow's last Horus Heresy novel, and sets up what they do and runs parallel to what Gav and Graham are doing. So it couldn't be much more of a nexus point, and it involves what Jim refers to as holographic storytelling, which is where you could pick the whole thing up and look at it from any angle and see all the points of connection that run through, from my stuff to Jim's or Aaron's, or oh yes, and mine's also a sequel to Nick Kine's last one as well. So do you know what I mean? the amount. Look, I can show you the amount of documentation that I have to work my way through. I've got books full of notes everywhere.
That's serious.
I've got maps.
Oh wow.
It is complicated, and there's loads and loads of stuff to do, but very rewarding. And sometimes I'm sitting here and sort of late in the evening trying to get something finished, and I'll have to send out an email frantically to Aaron or Graham or Gav saying, "What was the name of the third guy from the left in that chapter?" So it's great. We also are blessed, of course, with a fantastic continuity guru in Laurie Golding, who is on the staff of Black Library. He's a great guy. He is. He's just a sponge for information, and if he doesn't actually know it, he'll know where to find it out. So we can actually send Laurie an email saying, how many times do we know how many moons this planet has got? How many mountains have been named on Macragge? How many spaceships? What's the name of the spaceship that was? And he'll just tell you, and it'll be fantastic. And he'll cite you chapter and verse and produce sort of working documents. So he's our researcher and also our our sort of monitor. Everything we do gets looked at by him to make sure that we haven't made some huge error that will have all the readers screaming. So that's a nice safety net to have underneath us, so we can get on with the excitement of writing without thinking, oh my God, have I got that right? Quite complicated. It's quite complicated in the Horus Heresy. It's quite complicated for me in say the Gaunt's Ghost series, where I've got 13 novels.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite complicated in writing. Earlier this year when I was writing, and last year when I was writing Pariah, which is the first of the third Inquisitor trilogy, and I had 6 books to go back on. And you know, I know my own work, but not to that degree of, you know, I've only got so much headspace that I can hold these things. If I switch to Horus Heresy, I'm going, where was I again? What was that guy's name? What did I say about him? How tall did I say he was? That kind of stuff. So it's really nice to have people that you can refer to, you know, and just they can make sure that you double check what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, obviously with a series such as the Gaunt's Ghosts, which is so long, how to even yourself keep track of all the events in it? I mean, you know, so much stuff happened. I gotta be honest, I haven't read it all. It's just, I mean, there's too many books, okay? I've read the first 3, I think, and they're really old now, but I still love them.
Barely got going after the first 3. This story, actually, the length of the series actually drives the dynamic of the series in Gaunt's Ghost, if you see what I mean, because when I first started writing it, I had no idea it was even going to be a series. I was just writing about Imperial Guard in war situations, and as I came to do a second book, and then a third book, and then a fourth book, I went, what can I do with this? What can I do with this book that's going to be different and compelling? So, what sort of different theatre of war can I put them in? What sort of encounters and things? And the characters began to really develop a life of their own. And it's a big cast. And I was also shockingly killing some of them off, which caused a great furore. But in fact, it's now got to the point where, and I mean this slightly humorously, but not totally humorously, it's almost like a giant soap opera now. It's like a giant soap opera where each book you come back, and yes, there are big adventures and there are huge storylines running through them. In fact, the latest arc of books has got a storyline in it that I think my regular readers haven't really realised how big the storyline is going to turn out to be. It's there all along and they haven't seen it. But it's all about the characters. It's all about who's done what and how they interrelate with each other and who's got the rivalry with who. And that's great. And that's the one I get really wonderful feedback from, particularly from military serving members of the military and military veterans. Love the Gaunt's Ghost series because the camaraderie and the relationship between the characters in the regiment, apparently, and I'm very flattered because I'm not a veteran myself, reminds them of what it's like to actually be in an army unit and the things that go on. And I think that's the greatest compliment I could ever be paid. And it's because 13 books in, it's about the people rather than mission of the week. You know, it's that kind of different. It's not about the scenario I put them in, it's who they are when they get there.
Yeah. I have to agree on, Gaunt's Ghosts portraying military unit very realistically. I mean, how did you come up with it? I mean, where did your inspiration come from?
A number of different places, really. I'm a firm believer that the best science fiction and fantasy, so I apply this to everything I do, just not just Games Workshop, but everything I do. The best science fiction and fantasy to me is where it's grounded in something in the real world that gives it a feeling that's authentic. Mm-hmm. So whenever I go and write a book, like for instance, when I was writing Titanicus, which is about giant titans which don't really exist, I couldn't research that. So the closest thing I could research was stuff about tank combat and submarine combat and that kind of stuff, mm-hmm. to get the closest real world comparison to something that is entirely imaginary, and then shifted it sideways and made them into titans. You see what I mean? So it had a feeling of authenticity. When I wrote Riders of the Dead, the fantasy novel. Obviously, you can't research Kislevite lancers because there are no such thing as Kislevite lancers. So what I did was I researched Polish lancers, and I treated it like a historical novel and wrote it as if it was a historical novel, so it felt authentic, and obviously then changed the words that I needed to change, and I injected a little bit of the fantasy and the magic, and to me it felt very believable. So with Gaunt's Ghosts, I have always been interested in military history, so I've read an awful lot of stuff. I've got Second World War, Vietnam War, Gulf War, Napoleonic War, everything. A mix of period details because it's all the same experience, just with different technological levels.
Yeah.
And then into that, I'll put in my own imagination about how I think people are, my own, sort of how I imagine these characters to behave. And also nowadays, because I've been doing it long enough, when I go to a convention and I meet veterans, I love it when the games days are in Baltimore, because I get people from Annapolis coming up and talking to me, and they'll talk to me, and they will share their own experiences, and quite happily let me use their own experiences to inform the books as well. So it's real world research and imagination combined.
Mm-hmm. So if you could take some certain aspect of 40K or fantasy battles and implement it in the real world, what would that be?
I don't know. I'd I think I'd really like to see Titans. I think they would change the face of modern warfare a little, and would be spectacular along the lines. Having said that, I was told at a convention quite recently that I write such good infantry tactics in my Gaunt's Ghost books that they have been used in training but I won't say which military, but the military, a well-known military force has used them in training and combat, which terrified me. So, because I make it up. So yeah, there you go. So I actually am injecting something into the real world, whether I like it or not.
Wow.
I don't know. I don't know. Certainly fantasy battles. I don't know. I think it's a really difficult question to answer, because my head is filled with the things I'd like to see in the real world, and they'd be terrifying. I'd like to see Titans, I'd like to see Griffins. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. that wouldn't be a particularly pleasant experience to actually have.
Interesting. So Griffins and Titans.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So, okay. Here's one very interesting question. So, you're bald. Graham McNeil's bald.
Yes.
Aaron Dembski-Bowden is bald.
He is, yes.
Ben Counter is almost bald.
Yeah.
And does that mean that you guys are some secret cult or sect within Black Library as being like the best writers for Horus Heresy? And why haven't you shaved James Swallow yet?
Well, there's two ways of answering that, and they're both, of course, completely true. One is that yes, we are a sort of chaos cult. The writers, the High Lords are. In order to be able to do what we do, we've had to, sacrifice our souls to the forces of chaos. And shaving the head is part of is actually the only visual part of the ritual that you can see. There's all sorts of other stuff that you can't see, but we've obviously had to do. And before we have a Horus Heresy meeting, obviously there's flagellation and blood sacrifice and all sorts of other things that happen there. And part of the reason for that is we've sacrificed our hair in order to maintain the lustrous locks of James Swallow and Chris Wright, because they need to be fully hair. It's like Samson; they need their hair. Uh-huh. So we've given up our hair in a huge symbolic thing. That's the way it works.
Okay.
You have to make these sacrifices when you join the Black Library.
Okay, thank you. That was very, very inspiring. We actually asked this question to Graham McNeil, James Swallow, and Gav Thorpe, and they all had a different version. I mean,
I'm sure they did. Yes.
Graham said that this is what gives him his creative powers, and James Swallow said that it works exactly the same way. It's just his hair is a conduit. So, okay. Another very popular question here. When you write your books, what do you smoke?
Well, I tend to. It's usually low sticks, but sometimes it's Obscura or any of the freely available drugs in the 40K universe. Obviously, that's the only way I can keep myself remotely sane when I'm trying to deal with concepts as big as cosmos, space, demons, the warp, and that kind of stuff. So yes. No, the real reason is I'm obviously my body is a temple, and I'm completely pure of any narcotics or alcohol or any of those things. I'm like a Trappist monk who's focusing my entire creativity into the work. Mm-hmm. You can choose to believe which either one of those.
Yeah, but still, when you get to write something, like you sit down, you get your computer or typewriter or whatever you use, and you write, you create. What is your constant companion in that quest?
My constant plenty of cups of tea.
Okay.
I have various. I have various. I always keep my notebooks close to hand because that's where all the ideas are hiding. And I've got always never far away from a few miniatures for inspiration.
Wow!
And,
did you paint that yourself?
No, that was painted and given to me. That's an Alpha Legion, Horus Heresy Alpha Legion, painted for me by a very enthusiastic reader, which I appreciated. And then there are a few little sort of odd lucky charms. There's some fish.
Oh,
I don't know, what else have I got here? Oh, hang on. Under my computer screen, I've got a straight silver dagger for, that's when things get really tough. So.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm surrounded by stuff for visual inspiration. It all feeds the mind, really.
Okay, so you got your own little collection of trinkets there.
Yes.
For creativity. Okay. So, the Inquisitor series, will it be continued and expanded?
Yes.
When?
Well, the Eisenhorn books were written as a trilogy originally. It was always going to be a trilogy. And then when I started, when I realised how strong the characters were and I wanted to continue with them into the Ravenor trilogy, originally Ravenor was going to be an ongoing series. It was like, having done Eisenhorn, I would then carry on. And the reason I stopped the Eisenhorn as a trilogy was because at the time Inquisitor was a very popular game, and Eisenhorn was a character in the game, and I didn't want to close things off from people. I wanted to allow his character, as it were, remain in play. So I didn't want to continue his story. I thought I'd leave him and move on to his pupil so that I could do things and it wouldn't spoil anybody's campaign. And then Ravenor just the storyline became a trilogy. I realised that it had a really big point of closure at the end of 3. So I thought, hang on, maybe Inquisitor books are meant to be trilogies. So I did those, and now in this last year, I've been thinking about returning to the characters for a long time, and that's when I came back and wrote Pariah, which came out in hardback over here in the autumn, which is the first of the third and probably final trilogy. So it becomes a trilogy of trilogies. Uh-huh. And Pariah is is essentially the story of Elizabeth Beckwin, who was Eisenhorn's companion, and obviously both Eisenhorn and Ravenor and pretty much every other character who's still alive turns up in the book and will turn up in this trilogy. But in unexpected ways, because I sort of tried to play around with expectation and start the book in an unexpected place and show relationships between people that weren't necessarily what the reader was going to be anticipating. And people seem to have liked that because there's a great sense of mystery, and there's some pretty good reveals in it. There are a couple of moments where people, I think, just go, "My God, I can't believe it was that person." So it's fun. It's deliberately murky and mysterious. I mean, the Inquisitor books to me are sort of detective stories, sort of supernatural detective stories. Very, very different, and they're sort of domestic 40k. They're about what happens in the cities away from the warfront, compared to the Gaunt's Go series, which is strictly military battlefield action with people. It's a very, very different feel to it, and indeed different to the Horus Heresy books again, because the Horus Heresy books, as far as I'm concerned, are sort of myths and legends. There's a mythical stature to those books. So it's a very close character-driven detective stories in a very strange place, and that's what I intend to continue through with this third trilogy.
Do you ever play 40k tabletop yourself? And if you do, what army? And if you don't, then what army would you play?
I don't play as much as I would like to, because if I played it as much as I'd like to, I would never get any writing done.
Yeah.
But I do regularly play. If I actually fielded an army, it probably would be Imperial Guard, just out of loyalty to Gaunt's Ghost. But what I do this, the town I live in, we have a branch of Games Workshop. We also have a great little independent gaming shop called No Man's Land, and I will go into both and play whatever they're playing. So the last game I played was a game of Titans, the old classic old Titans game. But they will often set up games for me. If I say I'd really like to play, I don't know, I'd really like to play Eldar. To see what it's like, see what it actually feels like to play, because it does inform the way I write. I like to know what anything I've written about feels like to play. Yeah. So they will sort of set up samples. They'll get their best Eldar player in, and I'll play Eldar, or we'll do something like and that's really great fun, because it gives me an opportunity to realise that different people play the games for different reasons. Some play it because they're fans of miniatures and they love that. Some people play it because they really love the game dynamic of how the rules work. Some people love to get lost in the universe. Some people love the role-playing aspect, all that kind of stuff. And you can have all of those things going on at the same time. And when I realised that was what was going on, I tried to put a little bit of all of those things into each story, so that no matter what your particular thing is that you get out of the game, you can find it there in the book somewhere. I hope.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you had to pick from one of the gods of chaos to worship, which god would that be and why?
I think it will be Slanesh.
Why?
They have more fun.
Okay. Okay, I see.
If you're going to devote yourself to an eternity of damnation, it might as well be fun damnation.
Yeah.
I mean, who wants Nurgle?
You've been working on the 40K universe for a very long time, and you approached it from very different angles. Mm-hmm. Is there any particular topic that you would like to dive in more, and you haven't had a chance to work on before?
Yeah, there are several. I mean, I don't because the Gaunt's Ghost series is against chaos. I don't write the classic 40K aliens very often. So orcs, Eldar, that kind of stuff. I'd love to explore writing some of those things a bit more. I'd love to write more air combat. For ages now, I've been waiting to do a sequel to Double Eagle, which is a perennially popular book, and I'd love to do some more of that because I really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
And I'd also like to do some big sort of fleet combat books. Starships. So that would be a fun thing to write. So real full Imperial Navy things. But quite often, it's more to me. It's more about little ideas. I have a great idea, for instance, that I'm going to get around to at some point, which is an Imperial Guard book. And you think, well, don't you write enough Imperial Guard books? And the point is that it couldn't, for various plot reasons, it can't be a Gaunt's Ghost book. So I'd have to start with a new regiment and do something completely different in order to get the story to work. And that's quite fun when you see a story waiting to be told, and you've got to find a way of telling it.
Moving away from 40K for a little while now, what books do you read yourself?
I read a lot. I read all the time. If I go for too long without reading anything, and by that I would include like newspapers and magazines and stuff like that, I can't write. It's like keeping fuel in a car. I need to put words into my head in order for words to come out. But I read a lot of non-fiction. I read a lot of sort of science, history, military stuff. I'm very interested in that kind of stuff. I read quite a lot of thrillers. I like that. I don't actually read as much science fiction these days as I used to, mainly because that's what I do all day, and I kind of want to change from it. Even though there's some brilliant stuff around, but there is science fiction that I do read, and it's more often than not I'll go back and reread stuff I read when I was growing up. So I'll go and reread Jack Vance or Ray Bradbury or Frank Herbert or Heinlein or something like that. Something that I've read before and really like, and I can enjoy going back to. And quite often books just come along and surprise me because people recommend things and I just dip into it. I've usually got about 4 books on the go at any one time. I'd show you what they are, but they're actually upstairs beside the bed.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. So, Horus Heresy is a huge ongoing project with different writers, and so on and on. Can we expect something as big from Black Library with you in it?
You mean another big series like the Horus Heresy? Yeah. Well, the Horus Heresy is pretty much dominating everything we do because it is so big, and we've set ourselves we sort of sworn ourselves dedicated ourselves to making sure that the chronology moves on from book to book and that everything happens in the right order and we keep the momentum going, and that we don't shortchange anybody by skimping on an important part of the story. And obviously we've got the great destination in mind of the spectacular Siege of Terror and the bit that great climactic thing. Once we've got there, there's all sorts of possibilities about where we might go after that, how we might continue, or what we might do instead. I've been privy to conversations that we've had around the table about other things that we could do alongside or anything. And sort of at the moment, I'm not allowed to tell you, but I can tell you that all sorts of very clever and ingenious ideas are being thrown around about how we can entertain people with new things. and you should find out about some of them quite soon, I think.
Okay, is it true that Tonius was really repentant, or it was just a slight trick to hold Ravener at bay? From, well, you know what I mean.
Yes. I don't know. I think when you're that lost in chaos, it's possibly difficult to ascertain what the proper motivation is. But I'd like to think he was genuinely repentant, or some part of him was genuinely repentant.
Okay.
I don't think it was just a cruel chaos trick.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. You were a consultant and a co-author to certain Dark Heresy projects.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you play role-playing games yourself, and did you get to play Dark Heresy in particular?
I haven't played it much. I really enjoyed the contributions that I was able to make to it because I haven't played role-playing games for a long time, but that really was my sort of the thing that I did. Like I said, Traveller and Dungeons and Dragons and Call of Cthulhu before I ever started my writing career as a student, as those very favourite occupations. And I think a lot of my storytelling has come from the fact that I used to be the referee or the dungeon master, and I used to make stories up on as I went along to entertain the players and be quite ingenious about it and try and keep hold of all the story threads. And I think that really, when I'm writing a book these days, I'm basically writing my referee stuff down rather than playing it. I'd love to. The guys at my local shop have threatened to get me to referee a Dark Heresy Imperial Guard stuff. They basically want to play Gaunt's Ghosts with me in charge of it. So at some point I may do that. I may run a campaign based on my own characters, which I think will be a bit weird, but possibly quite fun.
Huh.
But no, I'd love to play it. I'd love to play it because I particularly like the role playing aspect of the games. Sort of probably more than the tabletop strategy aspect of Warhammer. I don't know. At some point.
Interesting. So you work on 40k and fantasy battles both, but still, which of these universes is closer to you?
I think I'm going to have to say 40k because I've written more of it for a start, but also because it's so big you can create more in it because the universe is so big. I think the greatest restriction of Warhammer is that it is one world, and that world is already pretty closely mapped, and we know an awful lot about it from a gaming point of view. So there's less room for ingenious creation than there is in 40k, where you can invent a planet, you can invent a solar system, you can invent whatever you want, do all sorts of things like that. So I love the freedom that 40k gives, even though it's still a perfectly constrained universe. You've got to play by the rules. But every now and then I just have a craving to write fantasy, so I go and I go and do that. I have an ambition at some point to write a Warhammer novel, a great big chunky Warhammer novel that's sort of the Warhammer equivalent of Titanicus or something like that. Do you know what I mean? It's one city under siege, huge, cast of thousands, enormous, great epic story just set in a place in the Warhammer world. That's my ambition, but I've got to set aside quite a lot of time to get that to work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Will there be more books about 30k? For example, about the World Eaters pre-heresy and some different legions?
Yes, I think it's safe to say there will. We're doing it in quite ingenious ways, and I say some of them are sort of secret projects that I'm not allowed to divulge yet. But having opened up the 30k part of the universe, I think everyone's gone, this is great, because there's such differences between 30k and 40k that it's worth exploring what those differences are, because it makes both stronger. A 40k book is much stronger when you compare it to a 30k book and vice versa. So it gives very distinct flavours, and I think there are lots of things there. I'd love to go back. I'm really looking forward, for instance, to when we've got the Horus Heresy essentially written, so we can actually write books set during the Scouring, in the aftermath. I'm really looking forward to doing that. I'd love to go back and write pre-heresy, pre-crusade stories set in the Unification Wars. I'd love to do that. So there's lots of areas to explore that I think now Horus Heresy is a very successful thing. It's proven itself.
Yeah.
There's going to be more likely Black Library to go, yeah, okay, go ahead and do that. We think it will work now because we've seen how well the heresy works. So yes, lots of things to explore, and I think that within the Horus Heresy novels, you will see some of those flashback things more and more and more. We will show you some of the things that have happened in the context of what's happening now. So we'll go back and see early stories of some of the legions within the framework of the novels that they appear.
All right, there are many different Space Marine chapters and legions, and obviously the Space Marines are like the center of the 40K universe, and they're this icon that everybody knows and recognizes. I'm not sure if you're a huge fan of Space Marines, because I am, for example. I'm not going to tell you which chapter or legion yet, just not to, just to make your answer as honest as possible, so that you would not be affected by it. So, which chapter or legion is your favorite and why?
That's tough. I didn't write Space Marine stories for quite a long time. One of the reasons I started with Gaunt's Ghost Book and wrote about Imperial Guard is that I had difficulty identifying with Space Marines because they are so sort of transhuman. I wanted to deal with human characters. And it took me quite a long time before I started to write about Space Marines. And once I did, I realised how much I enjoyed doing it. And they're even more enjoyable to write in 30k because they have more personality in 30k. They are not quite so regimented and precise in 30k as they are in 40k. Which chapter or legion? Really difficult. I mean, I would be tempted to pick the Iron Snakes because they're the chapter that I invented and written about, and I really love the way they feel. That's the way I write about them. But the more I write, particularly in the Heresy series, the more I write there, I find myself liking chapters very much. I love the Alpha Legion. I mean, writing about the Alpha Legion was a sheer delight, and I think they're fascinating. I've always loved the Imperial Fists because they are, to me, the sort of the noblest and most heroic of all legions and subsequently chapters. And I'd like to write about them some more. I have come to love both the Space Wolves and the Ultramarines, having not had to write about them, but it's fallen to me to write about Ultramarines in Know No Fear and then in the one I'm writing at the moment, The Unremembered Empires, both Ultramarine novels. And I thought they'd be written by Graham because Graham's Mr. Ultramarine. Yeah. Just happened to be that the Battle of Calth needed to be written. He was doing something else. They said, Dan, you do it. And I went, okay, very respectfully, took the Ultramarines, loved them, absolutely loved them, and I love writing about them some more at the moment. And similarly, the Space Wolves, when Graham and I did Thousand Suns and Prospero Burns, we were going to do it the other way around. He was going to write the Space Wolves book, and I was going to write the Thousand Suns book. And the main reason for that was because I understood the Space Wolves were really exciting to play and fun to play, but they seemed a bit silly to me in terms of making them seem realistic and authentic in a because they Vikings in space. I had a problem with that. But eventually I said to Graham, can we swap over? Because I think if I find them silly, I'll not even write the Thousand Suns half of this story well enough. Give me the challenge of writing the Space Wolves. And once I started writing them, I found my Space Wolves, if you see what I mean, and I love that. So again, there are Space Wolves in my next book as well. There's Space Wolves and Ultramarines, which is just great to write them both. And to finish off the list, the chapter that I most want to write is White Scars. I really, really want to write White Scars, particularly Heresy era White Scars, and at some point that will happen.
You are an author to some of the best and logical book cycles in 40K and Horus Heresy, and you wrote some fantastic books such as Triumph.
Thank you.
So, could you please tell why your Horus Heresy books are so different from each other in terms of quality, dynamics, and just sheer literature style? For example, three absolutely different books are like The Horse Rising, Prospero Burns, and Know No Fear. For example, in Prospero Burns and McNeil's Thousand Suns, he gets, I'm reading from his perspective, I get a sense that you and Graham have burned two completely different Prosperos.
Well, there you go. Each book, particularly in the Horus Heresy. I mean, I think when I'm writing a series like, say, the Inquisitor books or Gaunt's Ghosts thing, I have a sort of house style that's how the series is written, so that they will feel more like each other. Horus Heresy is so vast and varied. I think you can deliberately do very different things. So Prospero Burns is very much about why the battle happens rather than how the battle happens, and is very, very Space Wolf centric. It's the way they saw it all. So they literally see it differently to the way the Thousand Sons see it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we were trying to do. We almost wanted them to be contradictory. And there's a lot of ideas and cultural things floating around in Prospero Burns that don't, for instance, No Fear, by comparison, is not. No Fear is a battle report. I mean, it is just one big battle from beginning to end. It's even written in the present tense to make it more immediate. There is virtually no digression. It's about things, what happened, because I wanted to show what happened in a sort of very high velocity action book, whereas Prospero Burns was meant to be a much more thoughtful and provocative exploration of the Space Wolf mindset and what brings them to do it. So they are completely different books, not just because of the subject matter, but because of the way I wanted to write them. And I think that's, and similarly, Legion, the Alpha Legion book, is a book about intrigue and subversion and surprises and secrets. So again, that is also written in a different style. I think with the Horus Heresy, I deliberately choose different styles to write in much more specifically than I do with anything else, because each book has its own tone. In fact, the one I'm writing now, Unremembered Empire, which is the sequel to No Fear, is probably more like Horus Rising in tone. It sort of goes back to that sort of epic grandeur scale thing. I've taken it out of the present tense, even though it's a sequel to the Battle of Calth. It's sort of what happens on the crag afterwards. So that's probably when you read the Unremembered Empire, it will be the first point that you will have seen me return to a style I've used before in the Horus Heresy series. And then goodness knows what I'll do after that. I'll probably go off and do something completely tangential and write in a completely different style again.
All right.
I like to set myself challenges.
Okay, thank you. So here's a question from one of our viewers who happens to be your colleague, a writer. So he asks, when I write, I always kind of put the character onto myself, and because of this, I sometimes get a lot of negative emotion. For example, when I'm writing an evil character, and I lose all the desire to write. So how do you work with such big evil and remain human at the same time? How do you cleanse yourself?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It is sometimes it's where it is. Sometimes it's not so much whether you're writing about a character who's good or evil. Although, yeah, if you're writing about a truly evil character, sometimes it can get quite difficult to cope with that. But inhabiting a character, to me, even an evil one, is not as difficult as some of the other things that, just exhausting as some of the other things that can happen in the course of writing a novel. The two examples I give you, and I've just mentioned one just now. When I wrote No Fear, I put it in the present tense to make it really immediate. So I wrote 100,000 words in the present tense. Everything was happening now. Everything is happening now.
Yeah.
That's great, but you can't write a novel in a day, obviously. So at the end of each working day, usually if you're writing in the past tense, you sort of reach the end of a chapter, you can sort of put the book to one side, go off and have your dinner and relax, and then come back to it and pick up the story again. But because No Fear was in the present tense, it was still happening. Every time I left the workroom, it was still happening in my head, because it was now. And that was exhausting. Over the 3 months it took to write that was an exhausting process. And similarly, when I wrote the Eisenhorn books, the original Eisenhorn trilogy, I decided just on a whim to put them in the first person, to become the narrator. Mm-hmm. I had no idea how difficult that was going to be to sustain. When you're talking about a complicated story of intrigue that goes across, the space, different planets and times, but you've got to see it all from the point of view of the narrator. Really, really difficult. And in fact, almost to the point where I thought after 3 books, I am not doing that again. But I broke my rule, because now I've returned to the pariahs in the first person again. It's almost like you'd think I'd know better by now, but no.
40K lore is very old. It's over 20 years old now. And it's seen different reiterations and different inputs, and it changes, and it evolves, right? And but some of the older info still goes around. For example, the Emperor having the sensei, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you probably remember that.
Yes.
And the Star Child and all these obscure, little bits of information from the lore. So, is there still a chance that we might see more of this? Maybe by the end of the Horus Heresy, and or in some 40K books? Can you at least open up just slightly the curtain of it all?
I think so. When we get to those sorts of things, there are certain bits of the continuity that have sort of been revised out, and sometimes they've been revised out because a Games Workshop has decided to remove something from the game because they didn't like the way it works and they want to replace it with something different.
Yeah.
Some bits have not necessarily been revised out because they were wrong, but they've just sort of faded, and they're still there. They're just not prominent anymore, and they may be brought back or whatever. So I think with a lot of them, it's a case of sitting around and consulting people like Alan Merritt, the IP director, and saying, I really want to make reference to this thing, the sensei, for instance. Can I, or is it something you'd rather I didn't because something's going to happen with it, or you definitely don't want me to because you want that to be part of the game that gets forgotten about? Or can I allude to it and just sort of remind people it's there? And depending on the answer I get, that's what we do. So there are 2 or 3 things I know that that we as writers just never touch. There are 2 or 3 things we will never touch because they are completely forbidden. And that's fine by us as long as we know the rules. And there are other things that we can allude to and make reference to, and there are other things you can just almost make a joke about. I mean, obviously, there was huge outcry at the removal of the squats from the 40K universe.
Yeah.
So every now and then, one of us will make a kind of squat-related reference in the book, just a little disguise, just a little thing there, as if to say, well, they're still there. We don't talk about them. So it really is. We're led by what the way they want the game to be, and I'm quite happy to play by their rules. But yes, whenever we can,